is my sword. A place in society is my reward, because a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Success is something we all want to taste. Everyone has talent on this earth, and you can take it or leave it for what it's worth. No matter how hard things may seem, you've got the potential, fulfill your dream, because we're the future, and it's up to us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right. Hello, small but mighty team here. If you guys want, you can get a little bit closer to us. You don't have to. We promise we won't bite.
Hello. Okay, there we are. Good?
Yeah, I think we're good. So I'm Meg Dalton. This is Jack Hitt, new friend of mine. And we are here today to talk about all things podcasting. We will be doing a little bit of a pitch session with y'all, whatever brave souls in the audience want to share with us what you're working on. How it will work is you'll have about 2 to 3 minutes to pitch, maybe a little bit more since we have a small number of folks with us today, so you'll get a little bit more time. And then we'll basically take the same amount of time and ask you questions, give some feedback, just to help you kind of like focus your idea a little bit.
Sounds good, yeah.
Jack, you want to introduce yourself?
So yes, I'm Jack Hitt. Let's see, what is my podcast resume? I guess most recently I co-hosted a show called Uncivil with Gimlet Media. It was an orthodox history of the Civil War. But I've also helped pitch a number of different shows at Pushkin Industries and public radio stations. And I've spent some time teaching a pitch class out at Berkeley for years. So this is sort of my playground. This is my sandbox. I like to be here, so.
Jack is both a master pitcher and also a master storyteller. So, this is an honor for me to be on stage with him. I work at the state's NPR PBS station, Connecticut Public, where I work on our talk shows and our podcasts. And so a big part of my job is helping people refine ideas and to sort of think through the why and the how of a lot of the projects that we work on. But previously I worked at WNYC. I've done stories for NPR, CBS, magazines, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, so we have this list here, but if there are people who did not sign up who do want to pitch after feeling inspired by your fellow attendees, we want to get some wild cards as well. Doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. You can share whatever is on your mind, and I think that will be really fun.
Great, yeah.
Sweet. So first up on our list is, and if I get your name wrong, I apologize because there's no pronouncers, Alyssa Levian? Yeah, woohoo!
Oh boy.
All right. Hello, Alyssa. I recognize you.
Yes, you do. You probably recognize my podcast pitch a little bit too. And it's Elisa, by the way.
Elisa, sorry
Yes,
about that.
As I was saying earlier, my friends are the Lisa, I'm only a Lisa. So, my pitch is a program called Staycation Connecticut. It's a tour through all the wonderful, unusual, unknown treasures here in the state of Connecticut. It would be, I think, more documentary style, although there certainly would be interviews done along the way. And just looking at the things you wanted to see here. Audience, I think, would be on the maybe 25 to 55-year-old adults, somewhere in that range. Obviously, for the adventurous, those age ranges could expand a little bit. And I've been putting together a list of some of the wonderful places there are here in Connecticut. My feeling is I would like to do a show that's about 30 minutes. A lot of podcasts I feel are long and require too much commitment, so I'd like to make it a quick hit in and out. Sometimes they could be themed, like right now is a time to pick flowers, and there's lots of pick your own flower farms here. Other times there's just some really wonderful things here in Connecticut that people don't know about There's an incredible genealogy library, for example. There's a puppetry museum. Ralph Nader has a museum of tort law, which is one of those really unknown little places here.
It's actually very cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I would love to go. I hate tort law, but I would still love to see it. It sounds kind of fun and just one of these really crazy places that you don't think of. Dinosaurs are a big part of Connecticut's history. So there used to be a Connecticut dinosaur trail, but there's the wonderful Dinosaur State Park. There's also a very small little park hidden somewhere where you can literally just go into the park and there are dinosaur tracks in the park. So these are the kind of places I'd like to sort of explore and share with people. So that's my idea.
Well, thank you for sharing. Let's give her a round of applause, please.
Yeah.
Our first brave soul. Jack, thoughts?
Okay, so my first thought is I'd really want to hear how you think one of these shows would sound, right? So like, and let's just take the hardest one.
Okay.
Nader's Tort Museum.
Hardest or easiest?
I think that would be the hardest one. I don't know, maybe the dinosaur one even. But in other words, like, how do you, so you have your 30 minutes,
Yep.
and I think that's brilliant, by the way. When I did my podcast, even though we were doing incredibly complicated stories, we always tried to keep it under 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just end up with these gassy hour-and-a-half podcasts that no one really finishes or listens to, or they play it at twice speed, so they don't really comprehend anything. But it makes a good soporific. If you want to go to sleep, those long podcasts are perfect.
Right.
You know? But so, yes to the 30-minute deadline.
So I think it would vary very much by place that you went to. Certainly, there are opportunities for interviews with the people who run the place is one possibility, and the people who are visiting, why they find it interesting. Sometimes I think it would vary a little bit depending on the place. I mean, to me, the Tort Museum is kind of interesting why it ended up there. What it, you know, Nader had a very specific purpose, for example, in creating the museum. So I think I would want to go into that a little bit, as well as sort of describing it. It's also completely available virtually, the museum, so that would also be something you could go into. In terms of sort of ambient sounds, right, which is also going to be certainly part of some episodes, this would be an episode probably would have less of that. If you needed to, I always thought you could expand by going into what else is in the neighborhood to pad something out if there was less there around a particular topic.
Can you edit?
Can I? Yes, I can. I've edited video, so
Okay.
yeah.
Right. So I was just saying, if you're doing an interview, right,
Yeah.
you're going to want to be able to like cut that up and
Yes.
put that into your 30-minute
Yes.
in
I've-
some
I've-
easily way.
I've both for video and for books have edited interviews, so I well know the issues with interviewing people.
Right.
The very first interview I did not do the interview myself. I was part of a group doing something, and the questioner asked yes or no questions of the interviewee, which was
That's a hard no.
that's exactly right. But I edited a piece around it, believe it or not. So I found a way to do it. So it is something I'm very comfortable with.
So I really loved Jack's question to sort of help ground your idea in something more tangible. Something I'm curious about is there's a lot of just like travel content out there, whether it's, you know, on social media apps, podcasts, et cetera.
Right.
I'm curious like what you think it is that makes this idea stand out from like all of the other sort of travel media out there.
Right.
And then I'm also curious like why you? Like why are you the right vehicle for
Right.
this idea?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about that one particularly, other than the fact that it's something I'm interested in, and something that you know, everybody has their own unique voice, obviously. I have been thinking a little bit about. You know, a podcast is something that's very personal and a connection between the podcaster and the audience. A more documentary form tends to remove you a little bit from that. And so one thought was how to bring sort of myself and my adventures to the table, maybe as a way to come into it. I have looked around a little bit. There's one other guy who does a podcast, but he's very, very focused on the historical aspects of it. So this would be a little bit more, here just get a really sense of the feel of the place. That's just beyond what you would get on a page or a more historical reading. Just, and again, but still with a little bit of that background and a little bit more in depth than you might get somewhere else.
What I really appreciate about how she's describing this, and I don't know if you agree, is that I'm not just getting a sense for like what it is you want people to like learn or hear, but it sounds like you're also putting a lot of thought into like how you want the person to feel like while they're listening, which I think is a really nice marriage.
Definitely.
So I'm just thinking about the cold-hearted, cruel, impatient mind of your average podcast editor that you're going to be going to. Okay. And they might hear a bunch of these nice ideas, the Tort Museum, the dinosaur thing, and just think, well, you know, that's. But like, what different something are you bringing to this? You know, when you say documentary, I'd almost be a little cautious about just like saying that this is just going to be a description of this museum.
Not at all.
That's going to set off a bell in any editor's head of like, okay, you know. So I would recommend actually trying to make one of these episodes on your own, do it, and show it to friends, listen to it. I mean, for instance, if you're going to go to all these different places, you know, your intro might be something where you create the sound of you coming into this place and kind of create a sense of mystery of like, where am I today, you know, or something that has a kind of crisp, fresh feel to why you know that you're there. I'd also suggest that like, instead of going straight documentary, if you're appealing to people who are probably, you know, live here in Connecticut, they're going to be traveling to this thing, you might want to have some sense of like, how do you have fun at this place? So in other words, getting away from the straight interview of the curator who's going to say, you know, yes, here at the Nut Museum, we have some cashews, and that's an actual museum in Connecticut, by the way.
Where's the Nut Museum?
Do you know where the Nut Museum is?
No, the Nut Museum.
Oh, no, there's actually a Nut Museum. And in fact, there was a story a couple of years ago in the paper that just like thrilled my heart, which is that some squirrel had broken into the Nut Museum and eaten half of their exhibits, and it was a crisis, and I think they're reconstituting. They had some like macadamia nuts from some South Pacific island or something, and that was a big crisis. But you know, Connecticut is filled with these quirky, odd museums. Certainly that's one, you know, sort of genre. But I just think coming up with a sort of like your specific angle on how this show is going to sound, you know, maybe give us a taste of it. You don't have to do the whole 25 minutes, but even if it were just the intro to give a fresh sense that it's not going to be just like an interview with a curator and here's the, you know, here's the dinosaur park and, you know, that kind of thing.
I was actually thinking of that a little bit as I was driving in, because I was thinking of, for example, the flower ones. And there's, you know, there's sound, but it's, you know, the flower picking itself doesn't have a huge sound, but it's so visual, for example, and being able to share that visual kind of story with people, I think would be part of what you'd want to do. So I like that idea. I just picked documentary because none of the others really fit, but in the sense that it's presenting stuff. But yeah, I absolutely think you need to have the sense of why is this a fun place to go? Why would you want to go there? What, you know?
Right, you were saying your audience was like 25 to 50 or something, so I take it maybe
something like that, yeah.
Family-oriented and that kind of stuff?
It could be family-oriented, but I also, I don't want it just family-oriented because, so I do want to get just the, you know, the couple or single who wants to go out there and just have a fun day.
I think the big idea that Jack is getting at is sort of like kind of explaining the so what of it all, right?
Yeah.
So not just for the podcast overall, but like in each episode, you want to make sure like the listener understands like the so what.
Why that,
Yeah, like why? Like why am I listening to this? Why should I care about it? I feel like that's one of the biggest things that I feel like tends to missed in a lot of like pitches or story ideas is just sort of the like, why should I care, you know? I think that's your time. Unfortunately, we got to move on.
Yeah, that's good.
But thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause. All right, so next up on the list is a Yuli Aronson. I think I also know Yuli. It's like I planted people here. I don't know if I did. Maybe Jennifer did. All right, Yuli, you're on the clock now.
All right. Well, thank you. So to help myself, I'm going to read.
That's fine.
So, it's called, It's Not About Being Right. This project is an intergenerational and familial chatcast that is empathic and discursive, like a fantasy Thanksgiving dinner, where different generations try to understand each other's points of view. The ever-shifting landscape of modern media seems to be wearing away at lifelong bonds and relationships of everyday people. No matter the subject, people today struggle to find common ground on vital topics such as politics, race, religion, gender and sexuality, and so on. It seems to me that we're all trapped in our own feedback loops that take us further and further away from each other. Each episode begins with a brief introduction about the show and the guest and a little bit of our relationship to one another. Next would be a kind of candid interview about the hottest topics of the day. And we'll end with a brief fun game at the end of piece and a light note, and sometimes a hug. For the first few episodes, these interviews would be with my own family members. From there, I'd like to expand to conversations with volunteers from community of listeners. To protect everyone's privacy and the candid nature of the program, I'm planning to use pseudonyms for myself and my subjects. For context, my wife and I are both in our 60s. Recently, we each lost lifelong friends, both here and abroad, because of disagreements on political and social issues. And we fear the same could transpire even in our own family. I'm interested in exploring ways to communicate without breaking bonds. Could discussing differences in a candid yet in loving way actually smooth out differences and possibly move the subjects closer to understanding one another's points of view? And you've heard this before, and I have recorded 3 interviews already. And if you're interested, I brought a memory stick with what I find, I guess, the best version of an edited interview. And I've discussed this with my family members. One of the things we agreed that it probably is not a good idea to do a lot of editing, because the nature of the conversation should be natural. Like, as an example, the topics that I picked to talk about, the subjects of the interviews were not aware of. So it was, raw and off the cuff.
Well, let's give him a round of applause, everybody.
Yep.
Jack, initial thoughts?
So these interviews you've done, are they one-on-one?
Yeah.
But I understand from your description that you're really thinking of this as like a dinner party kind of.
No, it's not. It's basically the topics are people of different generations have different points of view, and it's always been the case, but it's getting really, really nasty out there. And my friend.
Granted. Oh, no question.
My friend over there who does our blog has noted things that go on. It's
So would you ever have
spiraling out
these
of
people
control.
speak directly to each other, the different
Yes.
generations? Right. So you would tape that differently, right?
So I've spoken to 2 of my daughters and a son-in-law. And everyone has their own political views, perspectives, and so on. So like I said, I think it was very interesting. They all felt inspired by what I'm doing, and 2 of them are in the podcast business.
Okay, so I don't know about you, Meg, but my first question is, my first thought when I hear this is the technological nightmare that is trying to mic and get clean, comprehensible, audible sound out of a group discussion, right? If you are going to have these people interacting with one another, or no?
No, it's a one-on-one. In fact,
So can I translate?
Yeah.
I think so. I think the vibe is like healthy Thanksgiving family dinner, like topically, but I think it's just one-to-one.
Oh, it's one-to-one. Okay, so
yeah, I mean, right. I'm sorry about the Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, basically, not all are. Thanksgiving dinners can get very heated.
Yes.
Right?
Been there, done that.
Right. So the point is that the people may come from different angles, like at that dinner, but it's still one-on-one.
Okay.
So we've done.
Got it.
Basically with an iPhone on the table, and the quality of sound was pretty good.
And when it's one-on-one, is it you as one of the
Correct.
people every time, or are you going to get like grandma and granddaughter at talking to one another?
Well, I would love to have that, but there would be a language barrier. I've started interviews where I was interviewing people. I think it would be great if my kids wanted to interview their grandparents. That's where the technology is going to have to come from. Come in because of the language barrier, because you'd have to translate and so on and so forth, or put up with very broken English.
And the interviews you've done, like how long have they run?
About 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Yeah, we try to keep it.
Good length.
Right. And are they one topic? It's like we're
No.
going to discuss capital punishment or whatever? Okay.
No,
Some light
it's
stuff.
basically, I started out by saying, who are you? What's your story? What's your relationship to me? And then what do you feel, that we agree on, what we disagree on? And the interviewee will pick up the topic. I don't know what the topic is. And I will be as much of a participant in the conversation as the person I'm interviewing.
Right.
So you're both like host and guest at the same time?
Right.
Okay, so my biggest question
And I've been
is,
attacked. Just for, in other words, what do you think about me? You're an asshole, sorry.
So my biggest question is, I'm getting a sense for like the kinds of voices that we will hear on this podcast. You emphasized, you want it to be an intergenerational cross-section. I'm curious though, I'm sort of struggling to understand like who is it that you want to listen to this? And like what do you want them to get out of it? Are you...
The listener?
Yeah, like is your listener sort of that broad intergenerational like subpopulation, or is it like, a more specific, is it like Gen Xers who are struggling to, have conversations with their kids? Like, I'm curious, like who is the person on the receiving end of this and like what are they getting out of it?
Well, I'm hoping that these conversations will provide an example of how to talk to one another so that the listener, after listening to this, would walk away and say, you know what, the people that I disagree with, maybe I can talk to them this way. And that's really what I'm hoping for. It's not entertainment only. It's what listener comes away with. So it could be anybody, really. There's no age limit. You need to be obviously willing to find common ground, but who doesn't want to find common ground in their own family?
Final questions, final thoughts?
You need to meet some of my cousins.
Same.
All right.
Well, they may argue, but they probably still want to be close to you.
Yeah, I think if you were, if you're going to if you're going to try to pitch this, I think creating like a sample of what you're talking about would be key, because I suspect that this cold-hearted, impatient, dull-witted editor this is who you're trying to wake up, right? And it doesn't matter if it's print, radio, or television.
I get it.
These are people who are receiving 25 pitches a day sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to break through to their like sense of like, wow, this is different, this is fresh, this is going to be interesting. And I suspect that editor's first thought is like, how is this different from an oral history? Right, which, libraries are full of these tapes. Or if you listen to StoryCorps, I mean, what ISAY does on that program is very narrowly confine the intergenerational conversation to one anecdote, right?
It's like what, 5-6 minutes?
Right, they're
Yeah.
like 5 or 6 minutes. Now that's in part so that they can be aired on radio,
Right.
But in this case, I think I would really want to have a sense of how this interview is going to flow, how it's going to start and move.
Well, I'm
and
happy,
then
I'm
end.
happy to
Yeah.
share the one of the interviews.
Right, we don't have the time right now for that, but yes.
We'll
Yeah,
we'll chat afterwards. And then I think my biggest piece of advice is just to narrow and refine your like target audience a little bit, because like when you go too broad, you kind of lose your like, well, who is this for? So I would narrow your audience a little bit. But this was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so next up, I believe is a duo.
Oh, wait, do we have?
Just one quick note. We've got 2 additional podcast pitchers that
Okay.
have joined us today, so we might want to
Move it along.
All right.
a little bit.
We've got Lisa Gallo and Tracy Dwyer. Step on up. All right, you got 2 minutes on the clock now. I'll wait till you get to the mic. 2 minutes on the clock now.
Hi, I'm Lisa. This is Tracy. We have a podcast already called Art Kids. We did season 1 last year. We just started season 2. It started as audio only, and we switched over to doing video also. So kind of like a YouTube / Spotify now allows video. So yeah, we have one more of us. We all went to art school together, and then we came together and made this podcast just based off of all our different love and interest in arts. But then at the same time, we stick with the pillars of economy, art and design in everyday life, economy and career, kind of like a news debate and critique, spirituality, sustenance, and health and mental health, because we all have a lot of like sub-interests. So I know that's a lot, but it all weaves back to art. So an art topic is always the main thing, and then it kind of branches into one of those side pillars as we do it. And then it's talk interview style. So we will either interview someone we know that works in the field, or a following episode after that will be like, we'll pick a topic. Like our most recent one was on Josh Harris, who had started in the 90s. He did Pseudo, he created Pseudo, and then Andy Timmeter did a documentary on him, and he like was the first like tech person in the 90s and did all this really interesting avant-garde art stuff. So we kind of tied that into what's happening now, AI and like the change in media, and like we just referenced her documentary through that, and then like what that means for business and commerce going forward, because we came up as millennials and like we dealt with all the economy stuff and everything, and it really had to change our careers multiple times. So that's another thing we weave into all our storytelling with that, is just like things we wish we knew when we were coming up about how to navigate our careers.
So is that sort of like the driving question of like the podcast overall?
The careers, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thoughts?
You know, one thing that we haven't mentioned in any of these pitches is, are you pitching to a public radio, nonprofit sort of outlet, or are you pitching to Spotify, Gimlet, or iHeartMedia, which are businesses, and they will produce advertising on your program, right? So it's a completely different sort of, that's a free market enterprise situation, and this is a sort of nonprofit situation over here. And so do you have any sense of like, since you're on YouTube, right? I mean, you have a current audience. Are you trying to monetize, to use the horrible word?
We hope to get to that point. We're still very much growing, and like we spent the first season kind of playing and trying different styles, finding our voice and our look, and knowing that we have a small audience right now, taking that leeway to kind of do that. We do all our own editing and recording and everything, and then we figure as we get bigger, that's like we're reaching the point where we want to refine ourselves. So our audience is still pretty small, but we hope to get to a monetizing point. And I personally don't know a lot of the difference between the two avenues you had mentioned. I'm not sure, Tracy, if you did either. So I think we're at the gathering information, trying to figure out how to refine ourselves as we continue to grow.
Right. I mean, I would just think about who your audience is, because it seems like if it's, you know, people determined to sort of like improve or figure out how to move their career forward, right? I mean, that's part of it, right? I mean, that seems to me that's a very good audience to put in front of sort of like the Spotify universe, right? As opposed to public radio.
Gotcha.
I
And
mean,
like
I'm not shunning public radio.
I love public radio, but not to sound like a broken record, but having a good sense for like who your audience is, if you already have a podcast, or who you want your audience to be, is really, really helpful when you are pitching it to different places, whether it is nonprofit public radio, whether it's sort of corporate media, startups. Like you really want to like have a good sense of like who your target listener is. So I know that you both are millennials, but like it kind of sounds like your target audience might skew younger because you want them to learn from sort of your experiences. So I would sort of like, you know, put together like a persona of who that person is, and that then you can basically create episodes with that person in mind, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is really, really helpful too.
Yeah.
We unfortunately have to wrap this up right now because we got more people to pitch to us.
Can I just add one last quick
Yes.
thing? So I know that in a lot of these different media, there are side episodes of experts and others who will help you grow your audience. Since you have an existing podcast, an existing, YouTube station, I would definitely push you towards figuring out how to grow your audience since you have one.
And so where do we look, where you were saying like people that'll help, like where do we look for that?
I don't know about YouTube. I do know that I have lots of friends who write on Substack, and I don't know if you'd want to create a side print version of this.
Yeah.
But Substack very much has entire free clinics on how to grow a paying audience for a written blog post,
Okay,
right?
perfect.
Because there are a lot of people out there, there are a lot of those Substack guys who make an enormous sum of money. I mean, all of us read about that very jealously.
Yeah.
But we do know that that can happen. I'm not sure we're all going to end up being Heather Cox Richardson, or Matt Iglesias or somebody like that. These are all very good Substack writers who make a living, just writing their weekly column. But I do know that each of these individual media, since you have an existing program, do have counselors who try to teach you how to find your hidden audience or grow it. So I would push you to do that.
And one last thing to Jack's point is that a common thing in podcasting is podcast swaps, right? So you can find a couple of similar existing podcasts that may have
Brilliant.
audiences you're interested in, that are art related, and you can reach out to them being hey, would you guys want to do an episode swap? And so then your show will appear on their feed, their show will appear on your feed, and it's sort of just an easy grassroots way to try to get some new or different audiences.
Absolutely, great thought.
Thank you guys so much. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I was an art kid, so into it. All right, next up we got Daniel Bruna. Are you here? All right, come on up, Daniel. Oh, you've got charts.
Show and tell.
Oh, right.
All right.
Okay.
Well, it's a science project.
Wow,
Okay.
this is bringing me back to my science fair.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. Does Coca-Cola rot your teeth? Okay. No, that's not it. All right.
You can't see it, but we're going to look at it, and we'll explain.
Whoa. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. More or less. Yep.
All right, thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and start.
Yep.
Start.
My podcast is Dr. Space Synthetic Androids Podcast. The table of contents is Dr. Cyberspace, Purpose, AI Android Character Concept, AI Android Focus, Names and Titles, Podcast Format and Description, Domains and Perspectives, and other podcasts in the market. Dr. Cyberspace is a learner at the forefront of cyber wargaming, cybersecurity, and information technology. With a rich background as a veteran of the United States Armed Forces, Dr. Cyberspace brings unparalleled expertise and insight into the complexities of modern digital landscapes. He has read extensively on the topics of designing hardware, software, data, procedures, and synthetic androids. As the host of our podcast, being a neutral-hearted information technology specialist, Dr. Cyberspace seamlessly navigates the intricate realms of cyber warfare and security, offering listeners an unparalleled educational experience. With a passion for exploring the intersection of technology, he dives into the topics such as cyber wargaming and emerging threats in the cyber domain. What sets Dr. Cyberspace apart is his unique fascination with interviewing synthetic androids, drawing upon his extensive knowledge of artificial intelligence, cyber wargaming, and data breaches. He engages in thought-provoking conversations with synthetic androids entities, exploring the capabilities, limitations, and implications for the future of cybersecurity and warfare. Tune in to our podcast for an enlightening journey into the realms of cyber technology, security, and beyond, guided by the unparalleled insights of Dr. Cyberspace. Purpose. Dedicated to exploring the latest trends in cybersecurity with a purposeful approach, our goal is to gather diverse perspective from a wide range of Android guests, each with a unique background, educational level, and experience in information technology. By sharing their expertise and insights, our androids aim to educate and inform listeners about emerging threats, innovation solutions, and future directions in the cybersecurity landscape. Our goal is to provide valuable knowledge and spark meaningful conversation that drive progress in the field of cybersecurity. Androids character concepts, androids focus, AI androids in conversations refer to artificial intelligence systems. They are designed to mimic human-like intelligence and capabilities They are software programs that run on computer systems or virtual platforms and are designed to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, such as learning and problem solving, communication and conversation, data analysis, and decision makings. In our podcast, AI androids are virtual entities that possess expertise in cybersecurity, IT, and computer science. They will share their knowledge and insights through conversations and interviews.
Can I insert a question?
Yes.
Because I get it. So who are your listeners going to be?
My listeners are going to be technology enthusiasts, information technology personnel, and people who are curious with the AI that's emerging and just like data breaches, like.
Right. So you mentioned cyber wargaming. Are we entering the world of gaming?
Cyber wargaming comes, it's a very long concept, but it's when it comes in many different formats where you have nations from, let's say, North Korea or China infiltrates defense contractor networks. That's a form of cyber wargaming. And also the military conduct tabletop cyber wargaming to stimulate what may happen, and also they bring it into a virtual format where they look at all the different possibilities.
Right. So this is real war gaming. This is not like me sitting
Like
at my
gaming.
console at home.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Yes, it's in the domain of, because we're constantly being infiltrated, the U.S. government and the systems is constantly being infiltrated from, emerging malicious actors and.
Can I ask a very basic question?
Yes.
Are you Dr. Cyberspace?
Yeah, that's my persona.
Okay, so it's not like a fictionalized podcast. So you are Dr. Cyberspace, and it's sort of like, as Dr. Cyberspace, you are having these interviews with like real people working in like synthetic androids, AI, all of that. So it's more like an interview style show?
Yes, it is.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes. I put the podcast format, description. The AI domains is going to be smartphone, security, surveillance, navigation, e-commerce, banking and finance, autonomous vehicles, smart home. And there's other podcasts that I listed on the backside on the market.
Right. Tell me the names of those podcasts.
Those are Security Now, Darknet Diaries, Breaking Down Security Podcast, Recorded Future, Smashing Security, Risky Business, Defensive Security Podcast. And then on the back, I have a QR code where you can scan it, and then that's my pilot that I just produced. I edited, I did, that way it gives a sample of what the final product is.
Awesome. Well, if anyone wants to listen, scan that QR code. The last thing I'll say is this can be like a pretty like wonky subject for a lot of people. And so if you're interested in like expanding your audience beyond like technologists, I would just kind of noodle on how to like make it more accessible. Just in terms of like language, in terms of concepts, and sort of just really ground it in like the concrete and tangible for people if you are interested in expanding beyond like the technologist space. But thank you so much for this amazing presentation. Like, what? Incredible. All right, next up we've got Karen Devlin. Are you here? Step on up to the microphone, please. And we'll get to 2 minutes on the clock once you get to that mic. All right, take it away.
Okay, so my podcast is called Team Players. It actually started as an initiative to kind of defeat all the focus on leadership and there's nothing wrong with leadership. Leadership is great, but actually team players are kind of like the underdogs, the unwritten, and unheralded, unglorified people that actually make things happen. And it's a narrative nonfiction structure, but it has interview elements. And it would be on a weekly basis, and my audience is school-age kids. It's for kids in elementary, middle school, and high school. I actually teach junior achievement in the schools as a volunteer project. I left corporate and military during the pandemic, and so that's what I do now. And I saw a gap in the need for teaching kids about being inclusive team players versus striving to be leaders, because we can't all be leaders, and you really shouldn't strive for that.
Well, first of all, I love that we're reclaiming the team player. Like, heck yes, big fan of that.
Yes.
Team players!
Also, I am someone that is I am like a very proud auntie. I have a young niece and nephew, and I love that there are so many interesting podcasts for kids now. So the thing I'm curious about is, how are you going to translate this concept to younger audiences? And are you sort of like, you know, is when we talk about younger listeners, do you have like a pretty wide range? Is it more narrow? Is it like middle schoolers? And I think sort of that will probably dictate how you go about translating that to a younger audience.
Yep. So as a junior achievement volunteer, I should mention I'm also a children's book author and illustrator, and I have children's books, toys, and games. I have a website. I have 2 websites and 2 businesses already. One specifically for children. It's called, in fact, Aunt Karen. So, but the idea is I'm already writing modules for junior achievement supplements, and so that will be brought into the schools based upon the DISC model. So for people who are already familiar with MBTI, profiling for personality profiling for who you are, it's a kind of a self-centric model, while I'm actually a certified DISC practitioner, and that teaches you how to become a team player, because it is an eccentric model where you're focusing on how you relate to others versus how you actually relate as yourself.
So am I hearing that you're going to be producing essentially educational material, right?
I already am, yes.
Yeah, you already are.
I already am.
And so are you thinking that this would just, what the podcast you're proposing is a part of that?
It's a part of that,
right.
and it would be streamed during the lunchtime in the schools. So between the 11:30 and 12:30 hour, it's a half-hour podcast, and it is for the various levels, and it features a team player of the week.
And so you mentioned that like your vision for this in terms of format is sort of like narrative nonfiction, so it'll be grounded in like real kids, real stories, is that right?
Real kids, real stories, and it's featuring the kids in the schools. But I actually have a celebrity element. It actually developed a couple of people. I'm at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting right now, so I have access to a few celebrity people, few celebrities in the sports athletics space, and one team reached out to me from a very prolific and revered coach, a 40-year coach in New England. I'm not going to mention names, but just ended a 26-year career, and I happened to write a podcast about it, and they reached out to me, and they're like, how did you know that? How did you notice that? And I said, well, it would be really great to have you on my podcast and talk about it. So, so there might be some celebrity elements to that, too.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, next up we got Matt, M-A-T. Hello, Matt. You are on the clock starting now.
Okay, this is a simple idea. I just want to do a podcast called For Cry's Sake, a podcast about the song that makes you cry.
Well, I love that.
It's a one-on-one interview with me and a person and their song. It's just an in-depth look at the emotion behind why this song moves them. It can be silly. I mean, I've had conversations. It was inspired by a friend of mine who talked at length about why he could never hear It's Easy Being Green. It's Not Easy Being Green ever again, because it moved him so much.
One.
It brought back a very specific memory. Right. And over the course of the last couple of years, I've talked to a lot of people who bring in different elements to the songs because it reminds them of a place. It reminds them of a person. It's the way that performer moves them, just the performer, you know? So it's all these facets can be wrapped up in this one podcast. That's it.
So my initial thought is, you said this is a simple idea, but it's actually a very complex one. Like the intersection of music and memory is just like such a beautiful, powerful, complex thing. So even though you're pitching it simply, which I think is excellent, like distilling it down, I actually think there's more complexity to it.
What's your song, Meg?
Oh my God, putting me on the spot. My song, oh my gosh, I'll have to noodle on this.
Jack, you got one. I know
I'm going to have to think, but I love this idea. I just want to say.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, you know, that's a classic elevator pitch.
Yes, yes.
It's the minute you hear it, you're like, oh, I get it, right? And of course, there's people have a million different reasons why they're connecting emotionally to some song, you know? I mean, I think we've all had that experience of like even listening to like, or watching one of those dumb AT&T ads where it entirely engineered to make you cry.
Or what is like the
why is
PCA
this
ones?
happening? I'm watching a television commercial. I mean, sort of investigating the power that a song, that lyrics, that a certain, meter or beat has to generate these powerful emotions.
It can be any age, any race, any gender, and it can also be, I'm more fascinated by cracking a guy wide open about their emotions because they never cry or they never admit to crying. And so I think, or celebrities or musicians, or it could be wide open.
So something I might plant the seeds for is you sort of are pitching this as like a kind of standard like two-way interview. I don't know if you've listened to the podcast Song Exploder. Do you know?
Yeah, sure.
So Song Exploder, I would look into what they do. It's sort of like a hybrid where it's like they're having the interview, but they sort of explode the song as they're doing it and like pick apart the different elements that like the creator, was super intentional about.
Yeah.
I think you could do something similar in terms of like, what are the specific, is it a lyric? Is it a musical beat? Is it a crescendo? Like what is the thing that is
We'll play the
evoking
song,
the emotion,
and then pause it right where they get to the part that.
Yeah, you're sort of exploding out the song in a cool sonically rich way, so you can sort of like make the what could be a standard interview a little bit more engaging to the ear through like sort of sonic treatments, if that makes sense.
Another podcast you might listen to, it has nothing to do with music, but it has the structure might appeal to you, is called Good One. And
so good.
It's a podcast about stand-up comedy, but the way the thing is formatted is that the host sits down with a famous comic, Nate Bargatze or Josh Johnson or somebody, or any Patton Oswalt, and they just dissect one joke. It's just one joke, the setup and the punchline. And they do like 20 to 25 minutes on how that whole thing came into existence and why it works and why, and earlier versions that flopped and failed. But in other words, they take this very small, containable thing, one joke, and basically just deconstruct it and talk about it from every different angle. I just think it's one of my favorite podcasts. When he really gets one of his interviewees to really open up about it's about the formation of a joke. You really feel like you're being led in on some like master class about that. And I think there's a way in which what's so nice about this is that it's a very containable. It's a 2-3 minute song, one person. Right. One single experience with that, but I suggest Good One just because it shows you how to like take something that tight and simple and really dig in and give us a great meaty 25 minutes of podcast.
Also, my song is Both Sides.
Oh yeah, that's true. I can't listen to that one either.
I think we gotta let you go. We gotta get through 3 more, I think. But thank you. Okay. This was excellent.
Thank you.
I would listen to this podcast.
Yes, me too.
All right, next up we got Nancy Boxenbaum. Come on up, Nancy. All right, you got 2 minutes on the clock.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Dr. Nancy Boxenbaum, and I'm excited to pitch my podcast about I'm going to just read it.
Go for it. Go for it.
Real fast.
You're amongst friends.
Yeah, I know, but it's a lot to say in 2 minutes. Okay, a podcast concept for a reality therapy show called Inside Women. The podcast's sole focus would be on the psychological health and well-being of women from the perspective of a licensed therapist who has got many women unstuck from the complex dynamics of the matriarchy and patriarchy. A little bit about me. I'm a clinical psychologist, a child psychologist, a relational adult psychoanalyst, and a mindfulness teacher. And I've spent over 30,000 hours speaking with women at very deep levels. And I'm an expert navigator of the inner terrain of women. And what I'd like to do is further the conversation from existing podcasts. Because I had a client come in just this week, and she kind of was disheartened, and she sat on the couch, and she said, I just read The Body Knows the Score. I just reread it. She says, and I know this, and I know this, and I know this, but now what? And what she was saying is, I know the theory, I know the research, I know the story, but now what? What I feel like I could do is further the conversations had on Unlocking Us, Hidden Brain, podcasts like that, by shifting the focus on the inner terrain of what's really going on. Because the now what really is, what's missing is what's happening inside women. Across the life, I've worked for 30 years in private practice with women, and I talk about like,
I'm sorry to interject, but I want to make sure we get some time for feedback. My biggest question is, are the people on your show your patients? Like who?
No.
Oh, okay.
That would be hard. It could be a call-in show. I'd be open to doing a call-in and for questions, but I'm thinking like Esther Perel, the idea of like kind of a reality therapy show. And so I have like many topics that I could share with you, but
so
yes.
with that in mind, because Esther Perel is like a pretty big name with this kind of podcast, I would just sort of noodle on like what differentiates you and your show a little bit, and sort of noodle on that a little bit.
Yeah, what's different is that she really talks more about couples, and where my sole focus would be on what's going on for women, like specifically, for example, like divorce within marriage, like how every marriage goes through 3 or 5 divorces, but in renegotiating the contract, that we're not really talking about the issues we can talk about sex, but we really can't talk about money, or how there are women who, like how brutal early motherhood is, and that we don't talk about that, how we don't talk about, say, 80% of the women in my private practice have come in, have had #MeToo moments, and that's not even what brought them into therapy. But
I take it on these phone calls,
Yeah.
you are actually going to be doing some therapy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be like, exactly. So it would either be, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, I don't think you should skip that part.
Yeah.
Because I think that might be the hook that brings us in.
Right.
Is hearing you sort of like take the surface story that someone is saying.
Exactly.
And then exhume the real, meat or the real issues underneath whatever it is they're complaining about.
That's right.
And I think in that narrative, right, first of all, I'm just thinking in storytelling terms. If it's just straight advice from you to them, as the cold-hearted, patient editor,
No.
I'm probably going to be a little resistant to that. But if I'm hearing that, like, these kind of like 3-minute soap operas are going to end up, that's what I'm going to get in each of these phone calls, or like a real reveal of someone's, personal
Inner workings.
Inner working, their agonies, and trying to work that through. That narrative is going to, I think, appeal to listeners.
That's right.
It kind of sounds like an intersection of Esther Perel and Delilah.
Okay, so
That's sort of the vibe I'm
Yes,
getting.
that's totally Delilah.
Okay.
So, yes.
We do have to squeeze in 2 more people. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
But we'll be around after if you want to talk.
Okay, thanks so
Very
much.
good.
Thanks.
All right. 2 people are not on the list. If you are one of those 2 people, come on up to the microphone. I don't know who you are, but I'm excited to meet you. Oh, sorry, you were not on my list.
It's a race.
It's a race. Who's going to get there first?
Who gets there first?
All right.
Okay.
Tell us who you are, and you've got only a minute to tell us about your podcast.
Okay, I'm Diana Montaño. My podcast, The Logline, is basically an oral history of the Mexican community that's been established in that tiny little 2-block stretch of Fairfield Avenue in Black Rock.
Obsessed already.
And the perspective would be first person, because I grew up in Westport. We were the only Mexicans in Westport in the 90s. I'm due to circumstances out of my control back here, and just have been really surprised at how many Mexicans there are, and the fact that there's a community established here. So just really exploring some of the businesses. I recently was there and saw that they're curanderas, who are the spiritual mediums, the healers. there's now like a little botanica where they sell potions and candles and all of that. And in my head, I just thought like, okay, once the curandera is there, we're here to stay. You know, like once the healer is there, the community is established. So yeah, and I'm a lapsed public radio journalist. I went to Berkeley. So I love data also. I've done census data, so really also looking into the census data. I'm a nerd, so I've already looked into it of like where the new Mexican communities are establishing in Bridgeport. Yeah, and it would be first person, just like me kind of narrating what it's like to see a community suddenly appear where it wasn't there before.
I'm not sure if you're like a Radio Diaries listener, but immediately my brain went to like a Radio Diaries style, where it's sort of, I know you mentioned it's first person, but I think you could do something non-narrated with this, depending on sort of your style of interview.
Now you're talking about like actually, she would give like members of this community tape recorders?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm actually starting to get in contact with a community organization in Bridgeport, and I'm going to be doing probably some media trainings with them, so I've kind of been thinking about that.
Yeah.
Well, come see me. I live on Fairfield Avenue, and I'm a Bridgeport resident, so born and bred. We do have to get this last person in. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Tell us who you are. What's your pitch?
How's it going, guys? I'm a musician and radio host, Jay Edmond, and I run a podcast called Unlikely Places. Started to get over phone anxiety, but it turned into so much more. And I started taking rock history classes. Now I'm trying to preserve rock history because I just think rock and roll had such more than just the musicians. There's more to it. I've had guests such as Joey Molland of Badfinger, Matthew Cause of Not a Surf. I've even had actors on like Thomas Ian Nichols of American Pie. And after Drake Bell from Drake and Josh going through a media weather storm lately of just world polarizing back and forth of what's what. And I'm wanting to kind of bring in some more controversial guests on the show. I had an opportunity to interview Drake and I turned it down. Our team turned it down. And now I'm bummed because we could have been a part of something new instead of blaming a conversation. You know, what happened? You know, what brought. So I was wondering, you know, fully, you know, how to get more views and how to not turn people away if you bring those guests in. Like kind of that kind of thing, because I'm nervous. Our radio show has a dedicated fan base. We don't have a lot. We only got like 100 subscribers, but I don't want to lose them if I go in a different direction.
I think transparency and trust are probably really huge. I imagine, like, you know, if you were to go more toward a more controversial guest, let's call them that, I think you would have to be really thoughtful about how you brought them into the conversation, as well as being like really thoughtful and intentional about why you're including them, not just because they're controversial, but like there is maybe something that speaks to a bigger thing that could be on your listeners' minds.
Okay, yeah.
And how do you know that your original audience would be offended by?
That's another point too. It's true. Like you don't really know. You worry because you're like, oh, we've done all the safe interviews and safe things. I mean, bringing Joey Molland on, we talked about suicide with Pete Ham and all that kind of stuff of rock history, the dark side of it. But like, what the kind of thing is, I always tried to stay on the safe side, and I've noticed that the views you're going to get from doing something out of your comfort zone, bringing in some kind of discussion that people aren't comfortable talking about, so they want to hear and listen to see what somebody else thinks of it. And so I was thinking of like bringing in. I have a friend that went through a thing where he got caught. Rolling Stone reported him, and he was a very close friend of mine that I grew up opening for and playing for. And now he's done the work. He's recovered. He's going to therapy. He's doing what he's supposed to do. I want to cover that and say, hey, I'm proud of you. Proud to see that the music world didn't just swallow you whole and cancel you. You're actually working to get better. He's working with the people that he hurt again. They're working with him. So I thought it was like, I want to cover this. And so like he's the reason why I named my show Unlikely Places. It's one of his songs. So it was like, it would be really cool to kind of go in that direction. So I'm like interested to see how it would go.
I would say finally, just trust your audience.
Okay.
Because this is a lesson I learned from print, but I was an editor at Harper's for years. And we always found that when we delivered articles that sort of satisfied easily our audience, they weren't that interested.
Okay.
Getting just outside of your audience's comfort zone, actually, that's when you really pull them in.
So you don't want to go too far out.
Not too far.
Kind of just a little bit.
But you don't want to become some other podcast.
Right, no, because I want to keep because we're a radio show too.
Exactly.
I play new bands in the Connecticut area. I'll play, all this other stuff and help musicians out. So
we've got to wrap, but I'll just emphasize that maybe try incrementally, just don't go like, boom, controversial guest. So maybe there's like an incremental way to sort of test the waters
like a 15-minute
before you
teaser, like try to bring them on the radio show first, see if people like
I think start with someone who's not as controversial, perhaps. So start incrementally, trust your audience, be transparent.
Thank you guys so much.
So that's the hour we have with you all. It was very fast. Sorry.
Great.
But thank you to everybody who was willing to put themselves out there on the mic. I know it can be an incredibly vulnerable experience, but we heard so many great ideas, and we're so excited to listen to them down the line.
Thank you so much for your great advice. I'm sure there was a lot of note-taking here today, and maybe you'll stick around for a few minutes to talk to a few people. That
We'll be
around right
roving
here.
if you want to come find us. Also,
yeah.
I don't want you to lose your presentation, so make sure you come grab it. Thank you, guys.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Also, if you're interested, 3 really good books you can come check out. Not from the library, but from Meg Dalton.